Welcome to another episode of the Quantum Connection Roundtable. Today we're joined by Andreas, who is a movement and nutrition specialist. If you already follow Andreas on any social media platform, then you probably already know that he's equally passionate about functional movement patterns as much as he is about doing these movements outdoors. Thank you for joining us today, Andreas.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you.
Hi, Andreas.
Hello. How are you, Lauren?
I'm great, thank you. I'm great. I
Awesome.
too am very excited for this conversation.
Yes, me too.
Just one thing to note, Andreas, when one of us isn't speaking, it's kind of helpful to turn your mic off because it can kind of create feedback.
Right.
But other than that, let's go ahead and dive in. So I just have a little preface and then we can kind of get started. So sunlight is really special compared to other sources of light. It has a unique blend of colors, just like we see in the rainbow. In fact, if you shine a white light through a prism, we can see that this light breaks apart into the different colors of the rainbow. And different colors of the electromagnetic spectrum signal different pathways within the body. Each frequency or color plays a really special role in our bodies. And we have photoreceptors that pick up on these different frequencies and relay the information to other parts of the body. In the past, it was thought that we just had photoreceptors in our eyes that participated in sight, but now we know that we have these non-visual photoreceptors all over our body, including in our skin. So some of these non-visual photoreceptors are things like melanin, cholesterol, the cytochromes in the mitochondria, B12 and folate are actual non-visual photoreceptors, dopamine, and even our DNA. So this means that our entire body is literally responding to the light environment that we are living under. We also know that vitamin A is bound to opsins in all non-visual photoreceptors, and blue light from artificial sources breaks that weak bond in opsins and causes it to release all of its absorbed light, as well as the vitamin A. So this liberated vitamin A becomes something called aldehyde, which then destroys all of our non-visual photoreceptors. So the question I ask all of my clients and anybody who might be listening is that, are you bathing in natural sunlight that provides a really delicate balance of each color based on the time of day, time of year, and your latitude, or are you bathing in artificial light that is dominant in blue and is essentially toxic for the body? So I guess this kind of leads to my question for you, Andreas. Like, most of us are pretty well aware that exercise is good for us. It boosts feel-good hormones. It can help us burn through our glucose stores. It can add longevity and improve our quality of life. But what is it about exercise or the benefit of doing exercise under the light of the sun versus doing it in a gym under artificial light?
So I would like to say that I really love that part where you mentioned about the light and how it, turns into a rainbow when you use a crystal or a magnifying glass, and it's really incredible to understand this process because it makes you realize that how the body is like an orchestra and it's orchestrated based on the light that it receives. And as you mentioned, that different lights have different effects on the body. And if we are indoors, training indoors, or in general, just being indoors, we are more likely going to be under artificial blue light. And this artificial blue light is just in isolation. And this is not very good for our system because in nature, isolated blue light doesn't even exist. You know, it comes with a combination of the infrared, the red, and the UV, and many other colors of the rainbow. Whereas indoors, it just comes in isolation, and this isolation alone is what's causing all of the issues, because the body just simply thinks that it's midday all day. And the biggest issue with this is that when it thinks it's midday all day, is that our body is placed under greater load, under greater stress. And then if we add on top of that the fact that we are not receiving natural light by being indoors, and we are also blocking the Schumann resonance from the ground, and we are also exposed to non-native electromagnetic fields, we are adding a whole lot of stressors, and we are removing a whole lot of, you know, electron donors, which is basically by being outside, especially if we are barefoot under the open sky. And so just by simply understanding what happens indoors versus outdoors without even exercising, then it makes sense that, you know, to exercise outdoors is way more beneficial for us, since we are getting donated free energy from the environment. But if we are basically indoors, we are being stolen energy. And that is the difference, that if we are indoors, we need to basically try and minimize our energy reserves, because it's constantly being taken away from us. So at least what we can do is to try and stay in a neutral state by taking charge of our environment, by controlling the lighting in our environment, and by reducing our electromagnetic field exposure. But of course, the solution to that would be just to spend more time outdoors in general. So just by simply being outside, we are avoiding being inside. And you know how most people are living in general, the majority of their lives indoors. So, you know, if you're going to train and that's basically another excuse for you to be indoors, it's probably not the best idea. Of course, you need to also consider where you live, and we need to consider people's circumstances. So if someone doesn't want to go and train and move their bodies outside in the snow, it's completely understandable. But at least if you're having to stay indoors, try and, you know, mitigate the environment to try and make it as close to humanly or biologically healthy as possible.
Yeah, I love that. So does when you do exercise outdoors versus indoors, does it have any effect on your muscle gain?
So you could assume that. I mean, I don't know if there is any direct like studies done on this, probably not, but you know, when science will catch on maybe in 20 to 50 years. But basically what we know, based on how the body generates energy and how it collects energy from the environment and how the mitochondria process this energy, for sure we can assume that it actually does improve our strength, and it does improve our endurance and also our power output. So basically we can give more of ourselves when we are training outdoors, because we are getting less energy stolen from us. And so there's more energy preserved. In fact, we are gaining energy when we are outside. So this is going to allow us to push ourselves more and to progressively overload our muscles. And in this way, we're able to, depending on the type of training that you're doing, of course, will allow us to see way greater results. Whereas when we are indoors, the chances are that we are going to have a way harder time in losing weight, because it's ruining our leptin, it's ruining our hormones, and it's basically raising our cortisol, which is not allowing us to be in a fat burning state. And you know, fat loss, muscle building, and all of this go very much hand in hand. The more muscle we have, the greater our resting metabolic rate. But also that if our hormones are out of whack as well, we're not allowing our body to switch into using fats as an energy source. And so definitely the environment plays a huge role in performance and just giving more of yourself in general.
I think that is amazing. You know, all the cascade that you just laid out in terms of all the things that are connected to the light being a proper natural spectrum or something that's artificial, right? And upon hearing this, and when people, you know, when you're jumping into this conversation, it's a lot, right? It's a lot. Um, I think that at the core, we can really zero in on, you know, mitochondria making energy or not making energy. And the light really does disrupt the mitochondria's ability to make energy within the electron transport chain, and its decision, you know, its ability to turn that energy into a fuel that is burning clean or a fuel that burns with a lot of exhaust. And when you have a lot of exhaust, then the energy is disrupted, and that sort of electron transport chain of turning oxygen into water becomes, you know, becomes disrupted by a lot of exhaust. And that exhaust does have we think about it from nutrition and from all of the different aspects of what we're ingesting, but at the energy burning level, and of course when you're surrounded by movement, and or when you're focused on movement, you are burning your energy. So to burn clean energy and to not have that energy be disrupted at that core mitochondrial, this the central creation point of that energy, the light plays such a huge part in making more or less exhaust in that energy production process. I think, like, simple, you know, because we can get off in all these, you know, all these, you know, there's so much to discuss, right? There's so much to discuss, but I just wanted to sort of mention that, like, at the core, it's energy production, and it's the amount of exhaust or not exhaust that you're producing in your body. And that exhaust is another way to say inflammation, or that exhaust is another way to say oxidation.
So, to kind of tie up both of those conversations that you're speaking of, glucose itself burns or creates more exhaust or oxidative stress when we burn that as a fuel source versus burning fat for fuel. But a byproduct of burning fat for fuel is that we create something called metabolic water. And this metabolic water also has the ability to interact with the light environment that we're under. And when we're under sunlight, this metabolic water expands and acts as a battery for our body, for our energy. And so, Andreas, when you're exercising under sunlight, does the combination of exercise and sunlight improve or expand this metabolic water even more? Do you know?
Oh, can I ask, can I,
Well,
add one more thing to that question? Also, can you speak to, add on to that, the use of your carbohydrates versus the use of your fat as fuel when you are working with the light, how that changes, and how, because Kelly, you just mentioned glucose and fat burning. So I'd love to hear you also expand on how you work with carbohydrates and fat and the light and your body in terms of all of that, because I think a lot of people get confused. Ketosis is better. No, wait, you need glucose for your brain. You know, so there's a lot of back and forth, but there is a harmony of utilizing both fuel sources and working with the light where you can optimize. And I'd love to hear you add that in.
cool. Yeah, good, great question. So, yeah, for sure, exercising outdoors helps to improve our blood flow overall. And this is happening through nitric oxide, because what's happening when the light strikes our skin, especially the infrared light, is going to improve the blood flow to the surface of the skin. And then upon the interaction of the UV light, depending on the time of the day, we're going to be able to absorb more electrons from the sun through the photoelectric effect. And because the body acts like a battery, like Kelly mentioned, the bigger the battery, the greater the amount of electrons we can store. And actually, we actually require energy for fat loss, and we require energy for like muscle building as well. And the more our body is in a parasympathetic state, the easier it is for us to lose fat. Whereas if we are more in a sympathetic state, it's more difficult due to the hormones. And so it's extremely important to be outside because this allows us to be more relaxed in general. The sun is more relaxing naturally to the human body. And when we are grounded and under the sun, it's harmonizing the entire system. So it's not allowing the body to go into this overdrive. Whereas in an indoor environment, our body is able to go in overdrive, and that is not necessarily a good thing. And that's when we start to see issues, with the nervous system or with the heart, irregular heartbeats, increased beats per minute in the heart, resting heart rate, and so on. And versus when we are outside, our entire body and being is just in more harmony. And so all of this interplays with the metabolism as well. And so when our hormones are in check because of the light, then this is allowing the fat to be utilized way easier. And it's also allowing us to, okay, depending on the type of exercise that we're doing, if it's aerobic versus anaerobic, that will also determine what type of fuel that we will use. And what you mentioned, Lauren, about the how the brain uses, for example, glucose or ketones, the body's so intelligent, right? When you run out of all of your carbohydrates that you have eaten, then your body will just start converting like whatever it needs into glucose to the areas of the body. Plus, the body can do extremely well just with ketones as well. And this is why it's extremely important as well to eat seasonally and locally, because that's another circadian signal apart from the light. But also exercise plays a role in circadian signaling as well. So maybe we can discuss about that, about what's the optimal time of the day to train, and also about the intensities of exercises as well.
Can I just reiterate what you said? I think it's really, really important. The parasympathetic versus sympathetic. When the body is in parasympathetic, it's easier to lose fat and to sculpt your body how you are wishing. There are so many people that are like frustrated and they can't get into ketosis or they can't get into metabolic flexibility, and they are having weight issues, a stubborn 10 pounds. And for years and years, it's not adding up, even though they're on paper doing everything that would seem to lead them into the body being able to lose weight, the body being able to optimize itself. And I think that's a really important thing to just, to highlight, that this parasympathetic state doesn't, it's a 360-degree cultivation where you have to cultivate that state in your emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual essence, so that it all works together, so that your way of dealing with stress becomes a, a, a parasympathetic set point, so that your body can move in ease in the environment, in its expression, and you can move towards the goals that you're wanting to create. Because when you're in a stress state and it's a pattern and a habitual, you don't really realize it. And then you wonder, why am I having this stubborn 10 pounds? Why does it work for everybody else and it doesn't work for me? So I think that's really sort of, I don't want to go off to the next subject and leave that one in the dust.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The state that your body is in will determine how it utilizes different fuel sources, as well as, the mechanics of everything. But I was going to ask, oh, shoot. Oh, that's all right. I think talking about exercise and time of day and how it impacts the mitochondria is also really important, because if you're someone that exercises first thing in the morning in a fasted state. And not that that by itself is necessarily a bad thing, but when you do it chronically, day after day after day after day, and maybe you even have coffee before you do this high intensity exercise. Andreas, can you explain how that impacts the mitochondria and the rest of the body?
Yeah, for sure. So what we're doing actually is that we're just totally frying the system. So in the morning anyway, depending on what time we wake up, if let's say we are waking up ideally with the sunrise, then our cortisol is gradually rising by itself, and then it slowly tapers off towards, the middle of the day, and then melatonin is starting to rise, yeah, towards the evening hours. And this is all orchestrated with the light, but also other circadian signaling as well, such as exercise, nutrition, and many other things like other stressors of our life. So anything that basically causes us stress or puts us under load is going to raise our cortisol. So coffee is going to raise our cortisol. Fasting is going to raise our cortisol. And if we are doing exercising very early in the morning and we are spiking our cortisol extremely high, we are basically stealing a lot of energy that should be going towards other hormones. And it's just being all devoted towards cortisol. And then we get this energy crash in the middle of the day. And then what will happen is that we will, just drink some more coffee and then try and pull it through until the end of the day. And then we're just so running so high on cortisol. And then this is basically throwing off our melatonin. And so then there's this whole vicious cycle that our melatonin is now not going to be released on time. And depending on the type of light that we're exposed to in the evening and the EMFs, that will also determine what time melatonin is released, and we are not able to repair our body appropriately in the night and detoxify and just get rid of mutated and dead cells, which is the role of melatonin, is to repair the body and the mitochondria. So in general, light has a massive role in these essential hormones, cortisol, melatonin, and leptin, and they all play a interrelated relationship. And basically, cortisol, if it's just chronically elevated through our lifestyle habits, this can have a detrimental impact on our overall health and well-being, but also doesn't allow our mitochondria to be regenerated appropriately in the nighttime, especially if our melatonin is disrupted.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because what you said kind of early in that is that if your cortisol levels are high, your mitochondria can't be doing other things. And the reason for that is because the mitochondria can either make stress hormones or sex hormones. And so if it's constantly making stress hormones, it can't be making our sex hormones. So that's how we end up with, you see a lot of these women that are really, really structured and thin and, compete in competitions. A lot of times they will have hormonal problems because they've stressed their body way too much.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, if you just push your body like too much for too long, eventually it's going to lead to burnout of the nervous system, because you're just running in overdrive all the time, and then you are mainly using glucose as your primary fuel, because when cortisol is elevated, it just that is like the easiest way for the body to get energy. So it's trying to produce as much glucose as possible. So that's also raising our insulin. When we have our insulin high, then we're not going to be able to lose weight. So it's gonna become very stubborn for us to lose weight. So that makes a lot of sense for people who have, a lot of high stress, and then they also are doing everything that they can, to try and exercise and try and improve themselves. But then that's another form of a stress on the body. And then, they're drinking coffee on top, and, they have maybe families and they're not going to bed on time and not taking care of their light environment. And so, yeah, like the cortisol topic is huge when it comes to health optimization and fat loss.
I think I want to add in as well, because one of my goals is to always keep the mineral conversation in the light conversation so it doesn't get lost in the dust, and we don't just think that the light is the only key. And when we have iron overload and our iron and copper at the base level are not balanced, then all of that contributes. So sometimes you can get the light right, but if you don't have that mineral piece also correct, then it tends to create a situation where you're thinking to yourself, well, why is that? Again, I'm bringing up for people who aren't as successful as you, Andreas, and don't have the physique that you do, and they're wondering why, what am I doing wrong? I mean, and that timing is really important, and also the when the iron in the tissues is in an overloaded state, it tends to create every single issue that you just outlined. So I'm just bringing into this conversation that iron and it in the way that it is metabolizing oxygen and turning it into the water, as Kelly was saying, is extremely important to have as like a concept within within this concept.
So Lauren, if someone was doing all things right, like eating a seasonal local diet, exercising in the afternoon, has got their meal timing on point, is sleeping well, what would lead to excess iron in the system still?
I think possibly the set point from that you've started out with. So in this transformation process, when you're working towards the transformation of yourself from unwellness to wellness, we have to take into account that the iron levels might be too high from what you've inherited from the download of your mother, even when you were born, and then the accumulation of your habits when you were a child, all the way up to that start point of when you want to make your shifts and changes, that sometimes we forget that we might be starting with a body that has inherited that dysregulation from the start. And so, that is when maybe more carnivore starts to come in, and people are like, well, why is my leptin? It must be the light, but I'm doing the light, and it becomes this thing where you're wondering why those few puzzle pieces are not fitting together. And in terms of like carnivore, for example, if your iron is not balanced to begin with, when you add more iron from the flesh of animals over and over, you might be making that silent problem worse while you're trying to transmute your light, transmute your habits, eat in season, etc. But the levels of maybe the iron content within your what you're ingesting could be adding to the problem. So I do just want to illuminate that I see a lot of people in in who are learning from the circadian biology and the quantum biology, they're experiencing setbacks because they don't have all of these pieces. And what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, right? But if you don't know one of the things that you're doing, like let's say your iron levels are too high and you have too much iron accumulation, and you've adopted a more carnivore, thinking that this is going to be the best thing for building your physique, then it might be adding to that. And so it's like looking at everything 360 and not forgetting that aspect, I guess is what I'm saying. And looking at your biomarkers from not just what hormones are deploying and what is out of balance, but realizing that the fundamentals of metabolizing oxygen is down, all those hormones are downstream from that.
And so what would some symptoms be if someone was experiencing iron overload?
I think, of course, the symptoms are going to vary, but it would be where some of these, the framework isn't tending to work. So we all know people, and I have clients myself, who can't get into ketosis and can't get into, can't get their bodies to turn over, and their hormones are, in a wrecked place, and they're doing the light and they're doing everything, but then they are missing something that seems like a phantom, seems like, what is it? I'm doing everything and I don't understand why it's not working for me. And I think that we do little things that we don't realize we're doing. And here's an example. Oh, I would like to take some vitamin C, but it's an ascorbic acid. But what is this ascorbic acid doing? The ascorbic acid is dysregulating ceruloplasmin, which is, the master antioxidant in the liver that is in charge of allowing copper to become bioavailable so that it can chaperone iron in the management of oxygen metabolism. But when we do things like eat salsa that has a little bit of citric acid, or have supplements that are have ascorbic acid in it without us realizing it, we're stealing from ceruloplasmin, for example, and then we're having a hard time deploying bioavailable copper, and then iron becomes dysregulated and isn't chaperoned. All these little things that are added into our habitual lifestyles, but are within the shadows, and we don't realize that, oh wow, I'm dysregulating my ceruloplasmin, I'm dysregulating my copper, I'm dysregulating my iron, and then I'm eating carnivore and now I'm adding more iron and the iron is not being chaperoned, those sorts of little things that throw us off in terms of managing energy from that perspective, where it could be, oh, it's not just the light in terms of it being the end all be all, even though the light is pretty much the most important thing in terms of our way that we interact with our environment. But then there's a cascade of those other things behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. Andreas, when you're working with clients and you're addressing their nutrition, how would you deal with someone who's got an iron issue?
So basically, what I would do, if we were going to approach a diet which would be low in carbohydrates, I wouldn't necessarily put them on a carnivore style diet from the beginning anyway, especially if they haven't gotten used to the idea in the first place. So I like to ease people in gradually into things because I just want to find a way which is the most sustainable for people. And this is why I really like seasonal eating for people, because it's just one of the easiest ways to explain. But if someone has, iron overload, one of the easiest ways is just to try and think about how can we get our protein and fats without consuming, beef, which is the highest, one of the highest sources of iron, and liver. And so basically, I would just suggest to them, focus on chicken, focus on eggs, focus on fish, and basically any other animal sources of food, which are, the most bioavailable, and those animal fats as well, which are extremely beneficial. But I do like beef fat. I don't know what it is about the beef fat that I like so much, but find that beef fat has such an incredible impact on the human body, as well as coconut oil as well. And those two fats, I find that they really help to optimize the mitochondrial function and improve the energy levels in my clients and also in myself. And they also act as great moisturizers for the skin too. So
Yeah, I love that. Is there, would you say that, would you recommend when we're talking about seasonal eating, would you recommend to your clients to use coconut oil in the summertime and beef fat in the wintertime? Or do you think that that doesn't matter too much?
I need to ask you a question first about this topic because I'm not fully aware about the fat in the coconut. Is the coconut fat high in deuterium, or is it only the coconut water?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that. Do you, Lauren?
I do not, but my initial gut reaction when you just said that um, was to think about that the that the coconut would be. I mean, what is the growing season of the coconut, and when does the coconut? I mean, in terms of, hold on, let me organize my thought. So, in terms of using coconut and being in different geolocations where coconuts don't exist, does the coconut have a growing season? And what is that growing season for somebody that's not living in that geolocation where coconuts exist? So let's say I live in Chicago. So would coconut be something that I would deploy more during summer months because it does come from a warmer climate? So I think the answer would be somewhere in those sorts of deductions. What do you think about that?
So I was basically thinking that the fat itself is not necessarily an issue, but if it was the fruit, I would be more concerned because I do know that fruits in general are higher in deuterium, and that's how I would base my answer on. So let's say coconut oil was high in deuterium, for sure summertime would be the most ideal time to eat it, in contrast to the winter time, because in the summer we are sweating more, detoxifying, we are getting rid of so much from our system, whereas in the winter time we are not, and we don't have that same ability to sweat and detoxify, deuterium from our body, and as well because there is less UV light in the environment as well. So there will be a circadian mismatch if we are consuming foods which are higher in deuterium in the winter time. So that will lead to, cellular chaos, inflammation. And so if it's based on that, then I would for sure say that, beef fat in general, beef is great for the winter time, because that's, deuterium depleted, and that's like a fantastic way to, hydrate the body. Because as we mentioned previously, that when the body uses fat as an energy, we make that mitochondrial water. So it's allowing us to stay nicely hydrated. But I also feel that in the summer it's extremely important to, continue to eat, high saturated fats as well. And of course, coconut oil is saturated fat too, but I'm just not sure about the deuterium topic.
I think with deuterium, it is closely associated with the sugar content of a food, right? Because the plants store the deuterium in the sugar content. And so I think the oil itself is probably lower in deuterium, but I have heard different people say that regardless that coconut oil or MCT oil should be used in the summertime, and in the wintertime it should be more animal fats because that's what we would have found, in nature, essentially. But I did look up, I cheated, I Googled it, and it does say that coconut oil is low in deuterium.
Cool. Yeah, that's really cool. And actually, one other question I had was about cacao and what's your thoughts on cacao? Because I've heard also that cacao is extremely high in deuterium or dark chocolate anyway. So is it the chocolate or is it the cacao? Because cacao is not really that sweet. It doesn't really have any sugars. It's mainly fiber.
I don't have an answer to that one either. Do you, Lauren? I know you use cacao. I don't really.
I don't have a specific where, I mean, I could cheat and Google it as well. However, which I love, I love that that's possible. On as we manage the radio show. But anyway, um, I have noticed personally that my desire for cacao shifts and changes according to the season. So I do notice that in the wintertime, I become less interested in it. And in in the early summer months, I was very much like obsessed with it. And so I noticed that when I become completely disinterested, and it's funny because a lot of times in wintertime everyone is saying, oh, drink a hot cocoa, right? And that's sort of something that's presented as a treat for the wintertime. But I noticed that my desire for my intuitive calling goes way down for cacao and chocolate in the wintertime. So I think that what you guys are saying is, corroborating where in those higher in those months and the part of the year where the light is more expressed and more intense, it would be a better time to use chocolate and cacao. And then during those darker months, you switch to, I guess that we can look at it like, is there beef fat available in this season? Yes, there is. Okay, great. Is there, is we look at each thing that's available and see on a natural trajectory when it's available and when it's not, to sort of guide us so we can see it more as an intuitive process rather than living so scientifically, like, oh no, is this too much deuterium? Let me go, calculate that. And it's more of an intuitive process. And I do notice my process intuitively that I just stop drinking cacao in wintertime naturally.
Yeah, I think that that's a good point, Lauren. When you talk about listening to your intuition, right? Your body will tell you what it needs and when it needs it. But for someone just getting started who is likely very disconnected from their intuition and the signals that their body is giving them, that might not be so obvious to someone just getting started. But I think, just in general, when I approach nutrition with my clients, I don't typically think about the deuterium content of particular foods. I more just talk to them about, is it in your area? Is it available at a local farmer's market? And if you're not finding cacao beans at the local farmer's market, I probably wouldn't be consuming them every day. But if you wanted to have a hot chocolate here and there, obviously not the processed kind, then, you know, I don't think that that would be a problem, especially if you have these other pieces in place. Um, or when you're talking about dealing with someone with a really chronic health problem, then we start talking more specific deuterium and avoiding it and watching the drinking water and all of that stuff. But I think just across the board, I just try to encourage people to eat the food that you find, you know, at your local farmer's market.
I think that what we're all really doing is reverse engineering how we get back to our primordial selves and how we tune into that evolutionary version of ourselves outside of the cultural scrims that were put on us that work towards decoupling us from the natural spectrum and our natural selves. And I think that's why you're so successful, Andreas, because you are leaning into that natural version of yourself. I see your social media posts, and I just see this primordial, you know, version of yourself that is, you're just getting back to who you truly are. And I think that that is where, when you say, Kelly, people are just disconnected and don't really have that intuition to say, I just don't really want cacao. It's Andreas's habits, incorporating movement and incorporating his relationship to being outdoors and all of those pieces that are just innate will lead you into that type of framework and set point to say, I'm just not into cacao. I don't think I'm going to have it, even though I guess I'm supposed to have a hot chocolate because it's the holiday season. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I really liked what you mentioned earlier when you were talking about the minerals and you were saying about how that light is not like the only thing. And actually, I came into, the quantum health space once I had learned about everything else in prior. So already before I was taking care of my nutrition, my sleep, my lifestyle habits, my exercise, my training, but I was not aware of the light topic. So when I came into the light topic, into the quantum health space, circadian biology, and everything like this, it made it was like the completion of the puzzle, and it made total sense to me that this is something extremely crucial, and how that everything is important, as you mentioned earlier, Lauren, that it's not about only one thing, it's about stacking all those habits on top of each other. And for sure, taking care of our light is extremely important as a foundation, but if we want our body to truly improve on every level, we have to take care of everything else, including our, as you said, our emotional state, our spiritual state, and how that actually impacts our nervous system and how our body operates. And so, if we are not, taking care of everything together as a pyramid, making sure that everything is stacked on top of each other, then the one thing is not going to fix us. It's like, the one meal is not going to make you healthy, as the same as, one meal is going to make you unhealthy if you're eating something you're not supposed to. So having that ability to be, consistent with our habits, which are health and vitality supporting, is extremely crucial. And building that intuition slowly comes over time. Like once you've built a routine, you start to notice, some certain things that begin to arise in the way that your body feels, or in your consciousness in general, the way that your relationship is with certain foods. And then you start to, dig deeper as you get more familiar with doing health promoting acts on a daily basis. There's this one phrase I like to use, which is, we are either doing something that is taking us towards health and vitality, or is either taking us towards disease. There is nothing that sets us in the neutral state, actually. every single thing that we do is either one way or the other way. There's no way in the middle. And so depending on the amount of positive acts that we are doing for ourselves will determine the outcome depending on the consistency and the duration that we're doing it. But the less good stuff we are doing for ourselves and the more harmful things we are doing, like inflammatory acts on a daily basis, then that will accumulate also over time and have a detrimental effect. So instead of having a healthy pyramid, you've got like an inflammatory pyramid. And so then that will, have a huge impact on our overall health and well-being.
Kelly, you made a really amazing post today about the metabolism changing in the seasons. And just to add on to what you just said, Andreas, it like the next step of formulating those habits and how you continue to walk towards health instead of walking away from health, and in the game making second by second, day by day decisions. We also have to take into account that the way we interact with all of the variables in summer versus all of the variables in winter are two different ball games. And sometimes when we're really just desperate to feel better or desperate to create better habits, we find one thing, we say, okay, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to just keep walking towards health, doing this. And we don't allow for that movement and the dance that has to happen in the spiral travel of our reality. And I think that what you brought up today in terms of the metabolism changing fundamentally is really important to also bring up. So people are not afraid to shift everything. And sometimes when you're shifting, you think to yourself, why am I doing this? But everything was just working, and maybe I'm wrong. And this is during those time periods of when your emotional or your intuitive feelers might be getting confused, and you're second guessing your own self. But really, your body is leading you if you start to be in tempo with the shifts and changes, and you, instead of criticizing yourself for needing to shift, you start free flowing and allowing those shifts.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you think about people who do a keto or carnivore style diet and they are very bought into this belief system that this is like the only way to eat, then no one is flexing their ways. We're not being flexible and be willing to change depending on the seasons and how our, body is changing or what is demanding from us based on the amount of light that we're receiving or the temperature and the electromagnetic field from the earth as well. And so, yeah, I believe, yeah, what you just said is extremely important to be able to adapt to change and to be willing to accept that, maybe we're not able to have a six pack all year round, and that's okay. I've witnessed that myself, and I've had those struggles with myself that, I've done a certain way of eating for a certain amount of time, and I carried it on before I knew about seasonal eating. And I just noticed that it wasn't working the same in the wintertime as it did in the summertime. And I was just totally shocked, and I just couldn't simply grasp I was basically then going back to my roots, which was tracking how much I ate. That's how I kind of started when I was young. I was obese and overweight, and when I was 14 years old, and that's when I started training. And then my whole life changed forever after that. And then I started tracking the amount of food. So when that happened to me, when I wasn't able to, carry on being lean even in different seasons, I was just so shocked, even though I was eating the same amount of energy, and it didn't make any sense to me. And then that I just started to realize that there is something greater that is controlling metabolism and mitochondrial function more than just the amount of energy that we are consuming or even utilizing, burning off, as they say. And so the more efficient our mitochondria is, the more food we can basically tolerate. But the less efficient they are, the less food we can tolerate. And that is, one of the harshest truths, that why is it someone who can be the same weight and the same level of leanness can possibly tolerate more carbohydrates or eat more food? Let's say they have the exact same, body measurements, and they're, you know, the same age as us, and we just, might not have as good mitochondrial function because of our light environment, or because of our bad circadian habits, or other things, endocrine disruptors in the environment, or anything that can disrupt mitochondrial function. And then we are wondering why on earth we are not seeing the results that we want to see.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And when we're talking about seasonal changes, Andreas, do you change the way that you exercise between summer and winter?
I kind of find that I can somehow push myself more in the winter time. I don't know what exactly this has to do with, but in the summertime, I assume that one of the reasons why my performance might go down a little bit is because even though I'm gathering more electrons from my environment from the higher UV, um, I am also depleting a lot of my minerals because of the excess sweating. And even if I'm replenishing them, I just find that my system is, because sun is also a stressor, right, on the system. And, the more the body is under stress, the more repair it has to undergo as well. And in the winter time, I find that the body is less stressed. And so there is more energy, to give. That's just my personal experience.
I think that goes back to the story of the Sherpas and the cold adaptation, don't you think?
Oh yeah, for sure. And cold doesn't it allow us to utilize more fat as an energy as well, right?
Yes, yeah. And so I think during the summertime with the excess heat, we're already hot, and our body's trying to cool itself down. So when you go to exercise, it's this, excessive, like you said, stressor on the body, whereas during the winter time your body is at a cooler set point, well, if you allow it to be by exposing yourself to colder temperatures going outside. um, and so it can tolerate that increase in temperature much easier from the exercise, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so the body is going to be cooled down, so you're going to be able to regulate your temperature a lot easier. And from my understanding of what cold does to the system, what it does to the mitochondria, and how it brings those respiratory proteins closer together. It allows the electrons, which we gather from our environment or from food, to be tunneled, through the electron transport chain way easier to get to the end to be able to produce as ATP. So it would make sense that we become more efficient in our energy production as well through the cold.
It's interesting. You're absolutely correct. It's interesting because before I knew about all of the quantum biology, I belonged to a gym, and I would push myself in different, no matter what season. But now I don't belong to a gym, and I only exercise myself outside, and I keep my home adapted to the heat and the cold. Um, so I also notice, and I never thought of this, Andreas, I slow down a lot in the summer because it's so hot. And if I don't walk or move at sunrise or sometimes sunset into the evening hours, I don't do it. But in the wintertime, I'm raring to go unless there's a swimming pool involved. Then you can, I find that if I had my way and I had a lap pool, I'd be lap pooling all summer, and wanting to less lap pool in the middle of the winter, because it would be so cold to get in, every other day.
And so, oh,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
So what I was gonna say was that nature is always calling us to do what feels the most right thing. So in the summertime, we are drawn towards the water and we want to be going in the cold. And as Dr. Jack Kruse mentions that when we have electrons, because light can only interact with electrons. So when we are in the sea, grounded with all those minerals that we're absorbing through our skin, or if we swallow some seawater as well by accident, we're able to interact with that light better and we're able to absorb more energy because, our body is under more stress in the summertime, but at the same time, nature is trying to heal us simultaneously. So if we're living 100% in harmony with nature, and are able to get grounded, especially in the ocean or lake, especially if it's a cold water, that's like a fantastic way to get, so many benefits at the same time. Whereas in the wintertime, it's just calling us to stay, not so cold, but at the same time, to embrace the cold so that we are resilient to it and so that our body is trying to generate its own light internally, its own heat system.
And so when you talk about exercise and cold, specifically like cold water therapy, do you uh, do you believe that cold water should only be used before exercise? And if it's used after exercise, like specifically weight training, that it can decrease your gains?
I don't necessarily think that it has such a big impact on the amount of, muscle growth that we're going to have. It's just going to delay the inflammatory process. And this is why you see many people or many athletes doing this who play sports, straight after the game is because the goal of doing it is completely different compared to someone who is doing it for longevity, vitality, and, people like us who are just trying to optimize the mitochondrial function. So athletes are trying to do it to get a competitive edge. And when reduce the inflammatory process, you're not going to be as sore, especially if you have a competition and you're competing for many days in a row. Let's say you're playing basketball or football or whatever, sport you're playing. You obviously want to prevent, the muscle soreness, but at the same time, that potentially could be risky because you're shutting off the body's signals of whether it's actually sore or not. And this could lead, to risks of injury as well, because we're not allowing the body to tell us how it's feeling really, because we are just blunting those signals. It's like a numbing mechanism, it's this is why a lot of people use it. And of course, people who are regular gym goers and are trying to increase their muscle gains, they should definitely not be doing it after exercise and definitely before or even on rest days in general, away from your training overall. So that's my take on the cold topic.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point about, using it after a competition or, an intense bout of exercise is yes, it will lower your level of soreness, but it's also blunting the important signaling that your body is going through to tell you you've had enough and you're more likely to become injured because of that. Do you approach cold therapy different between your male clients and your female clients?
Yes, because cold is also a stressor. So everything from the environment, pretty much, nature is built to make us badass, badass human beings. And we're all designed differently based on our genders. And, men can tolerate more stress because we don't have this like 28-day cycle, but the 28-day cycle in ladies like has to be fully respected. And, leading up to the, point where the ladies are going to have their period, we have to take it more easy because as the body is preparing for that, and also 1 week afterwards as well. So cold is not recommended during those times because it is a stressor. It's the same with intense exercise. We don't want to be exercising intensely for ladies, but for guys, it's just a little bit different. For guys, it's more about the time of the day rather than the time in the month that we want to be thinking when are we adding that stressor.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so you have a partner maybe in your business or just your life partner, and she is very physically fit as well. And so if she's honoring her female cycle during that period of time leading up to her cycle and then right after, how does she maintain her physique, or what does she do for herself to keep herself, flexible and mobile during that time period without excessively stressing her body?
Okay, so yeah, Tina is my wife to become. We're not married yet, but hopefully soon. And yeah, so basically what she does is that she takes it a little bit more easy with the nutrition side of things. So for example, she primarily eats a keto slash carnivore style diet, a little bit like me, but she tries to incorporate more carbohydrates more often, even when it's not I mean, the seasonal, of course, carbohydrates as well, but she incorporates them way more than me because she acknowledges that, when we are in a ketogenic state, or yeah, in a ketogenic state, our body's more easier to, raise cortisol, and cortisol is not good in excess, as we mentioned previously. So by incorporating some seasonal, fruits and vegetables more often for ladies, especially around the period, is actually super beneficial because you're just going to allow the hormones to work better. So that's one thing that she does that's different to me. And also during the times, when it's leading up to the period as well, the intensity of the training begins to go back in terms of the weight training, but she focuses more on mobility type of training, like what you see on her page. So a lot of the stuff that she's putting there is actually very gentle and subtle on the body. It just all depends on the amount of duration, repetitions, sets. So everything is always, about context. So something that you might see on social media might look super tough, but it just depends on the individual's fitness. So for example, Tina is extremely fit, so for her certain things are extremely easy, so that doesn't actually place so much load and stress on her system. But for someone else, um, those exact same movements for the same amount of reps and duration might actually be super stressful. So we always have to try and understand the individual, and this is what I do with my clients as well. I really try and understand the individual as much as possible when I'm trying to design them a movement plan or nutrition plan or lifestyle plan, so we can get the best outcome and to optimize the hormone functions as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What metrics do you use to help gauge how stressful an activity is for your clients?
So, for example, anything that is raising the heart rate too much, anything that is putting excess load. So a good way to measure the stress is by checking their 1 rep max on specific exercises, or in general, what is their maximum that they can do on a certain exercise. And we typically back off by 30 to 40%, depending on the person's tolerance and their fitness level. So that is like one of the easiest way to, reduce the amount of stress in a measurable way.
Awesome. Um, Lauren,
I,
were
I
you going to
yeah,
say
I have
something?
a question for you, Andreas. I notice, and of course, I'm always clocking myself. intuitively. And what I notice is right before menstruation, I get a large burst of energy and I want to really move. And then that is what um, almost tips it off or works towards that downward flow and that moment of release. And then from there, I take myself into, I go into more of like, I don't want to move at all anymore, and it drops off. So there's this increase in, I could, for example, just be, how can I put this? So intuitively, I'll notice that on a given day that I didn't realize in the beginning of the day was the day before my period, I will go out and be like, I want to walk for even further, or I want to walk faster. I'll have a burst of energy, and then I'll look back and say, oh, okay, so that really tipped me off. So how would you explain that in terms of a woman using that moment, or using micro fluctuations? So of course we tend to look at like, okay, so right as your PMS, you're going to want to conserve your energy, but I do always get that burst. So how would you explain that?
So based on what I understand is that, how the body is trying to accumulate energy for that whole process to occur. And it would make sense to me that you're reaching almost like a peak moment where you have accumulated so much excess energy, because to understand energy, we need to understand like what is vitality in general. And vitality is to have excess energy than what we actually need. And that doesn't mean in terms of calories, but that just means in terms of available energy to utilize in the system for healing, repair, and everything like this. And when all of those processes have been already dealt with, if we have excess energy, then we're able to have more energy to do all the things that we love and enjoy in life, and have more energy, to exercise, to move, to be creative, and all that good stuff. And it would only make sense to me that, leading up to that point, you're just, preserving, the system is preserving energy. And all of a sudden you've reached a point where you've peaked out, at 100% battery. And then, that's the moment, your body requires the energy for what is to come. And that would make sense why you would have that.
I love that. Yeah, yeah. I've always noticed that, and I until now I actually haven't really put two and two together as to why I use that as an indicator. I mean, I would use it as an indicator, like, oh wow, I just really, walked 10 extra miles there today. Why? Oh yeah, okay. Just I pushed that over the edge there. Now I'm gonna really be in rest mode. So that's very interesting to have clarity on that.
Yeah, and one thing which I would suggest is that when you do have that peak energy, is that you actually go a little bit against your body and you don't listen to that so much, and more preserve it, because I feel that it's way easier afterwards when you do want to be resting. Maybe you don't want to be resting as much because you have like more energy reserves. Whereas if we, give of ourselves too much, then it's almost that we need to have that time to really recover afterwards.
Yeah, I understand. I understand what you're saying. Of course, there is. I'm looking at a parallel of when, for example, a woman is in labor and or she wants to go into labor. And I know that menstruation and labor are apples and oranges, but they're in a similar kind of release mode. And there is like, when you're wanting to induce that labor where you get up, you move around, you got to get it moving, get it moving. So I kind of see it as like that similarity, but I do agree with you that you sometimes have to go against, like, you can't really take it all the way over the edge and spend your energy in an unconscious way just because your body wants to move it out, and then on the back end have a deficit of that vitality.
Yeah, so I think that when it comes to labor, it's just that the body constantly craves movement in general. So the body never really wants to be at rest. So even when we talk about rest, that's like a very modern thing. When if we think about our ancestors, you could never really relax, 100% on a comfortable, soft couch or something like that. You would always be in a little bit of a ready state, and that constant movement is what allows, the blood to be going around the lymphatic system. It allows the fascia to stay more pliable and allows all the structures of the body to be more pliable in general. And actually, this is what allows us to maintain a ready state, and to have good mobility all the time. Whereas stagnation, like just sitting down for long periods of time or laying down, is actually not so good for us unless we're sleeping, of course. Um, and then this is actually not ideal, especially if we're trying to give birth, because the stagnation is actually going to cause constriction of the muscles and the fascia, and then this is not going to allow the baby to come through so easy. Whereas if we're moving around and if we're more in this social engagement, parasympathetic style state, then all of our muscles are more relaxed, more loose. Don't you notice also, like when you go on a really long walk, after a while, your whole arms and legs and everything feel like jelly? Why is that? It's because your nervous system has just shifted gears, and you're just, tuned into the environment with your nervous system, because the environment itself is automatically meant to bring us back to, a social engagement, parasympathetic state.
I
Yeah.
love, yeah, that
Sorry,
you
go
brought,
ahead. Yeah.
I love that you brought that up, because when I'm walking, which I do, just about every day, oftentimes when I get home, I notice that I do feel a little bit like jelly. And I never put made the correlation that because my nervous system had relaxed so much, that was why. I kind of thought associated with it with maybe the fact that I had overdone it, and now, my body's saying that's enough.
Oh, I just was walking a few weeks ago in the redwood forests, and it was just an easy walk, and it was maybe for, I would say, 2 hours. And when I got home, or was finished with that, I was feeling like double jelly. And that's so interesting that possibly the forest and the trees and the frequency of the entire environment was adding to a level of nervous system regulation that I'm not used to in the city of Los Angeles. And so I felt a double jelly after that activity. And that's so interesting to put two and two together now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you were to walk in a city, in contrast to walking in the woods, then for sure you can mm, feel a perceivable difference in the way that your muscles feel. I mean, muscles are a very good way to observe how our state of our nervous system is. So if we find that our muscles are chronically tight or stiff, that could indicate that our body is under extra stress, even though we are not aware of it. Even let's say we are not mentally, psychologically stressed, and we don't have any other stresses in our life, but just simply our environment is more stressful. That could be contributing in general to our overall stiffness and reducing our mobility and our quality of movement. So this is another reason why moving outdoors, is allowing our body to be more fluid, and is also reducing our risks of injury as well. But that also has many other factors to come into this as well, because when we are indoors under fluorescent lighting and close to non-native EMFs, our body naturally becomes more stiff, because we are in more of a sympathetic state. And, cortisol is high. So we have like this calcium influx. So it's causing muscle contraction. And, when the blood and lymphatic system kind of flow around the body effortlessly, we cannot deliver oxygen around the body efficiently, we cannot deliver nutrients. So, well, what do the mitochondria require to make energy? They need oxygen, right? And so it's extremely important to understand that the environment has such a big impact on us, even though we don't realize it. It's just that we need to be able to start, as you mentioned earlier, Lauren, about becoming more in tune and becoming more aware of our body and how it feels, and realizing that different environments affect us differently.
And there's also that in the spectrum, in the electromagnetic spectrum, we're only seeing, we started the conversation out with the electromagnetic spectrum, and then there's all other levels within the electromagnetic spectrum that we don't see outside of the visible spectrum. And the visible spectrum is only 0.0035%, not even 1%. So there's so much going on. And in that electromagnetic frequency exchange, there is on a greater scale and then on a smaller scale. So we are bidirectionally communicating with our environment at all times, energetically, through frequency, through the electromagnetic frequency outside of that visible spectrum that we started out the conversation with.
Yeah, and you could assume that smells and shapes and everything like this is also the electromagnetic spectrum as well, and how our body basically puts like the different frequencies together and gives us a specific smell or gives us a specific shape that we can perceive, or a specific temperature. Everything could be part of the electromagnetic spectrum in a way, and for sure how that has a big impact on our nervous system. And there is a reason why native electromagnetic fields are so important for us, is because our body can understand that, because our DNA is ancestral. And even though we think that we are not our ancestors, well, we are still are in our DNA, and we have evolved to be in contact and in tune with the earth, under the stars, barefoot on the ground, and being in harmony with nature and with the animals and with the environment. And this is what makes us human. And being human is being healthy. So being healthy is being human. It's not, so if we are not healthy, we are not being human in a way.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. I think, they've done studies on animals where they've put them under certain kinds of stress, whether that's, cutting their spinal cord or feeding them certain types of food. And then they breed these animals and they show that the offspring of the animals recognizes that same kind of stressor that their parents were put under. And so we too carry that ability to recognize both stressors and environmental cues based off of what our ancestors were exposed to. I think that's a really fascinating aspect of human nature in general. But when we talk about these different cues and what is best for our body, there's so much, like kind of like what Lauren said, we're in this bi-directional relationship with our environment, where we're receiving signals outside of what we can visibly see, but we're also sending signals. And when we're out in nature, it's all of it that's playing a role in our physiology. It's the color of the leaves and the trees and the grass, the shapes of the roads. There's studies that show when, the roads are straight lines, that can be stressful, versus winding roads is less stressful. There's all different kinds of information that's being taken into our body through all of our different means of perception. And that includes, like you said, Andreas, our ability to smell and taste and hear. They're all connected. Our skin has the ability to smell and hear, and it sends those signals up to our ears for interpretation. We're just so much more complex than what we've kind of been led to believe, and we're constantly being distracted with all of this other information through, having social media and a TV on at all times, or even music playing at all times. All of these cues and signals that are happening around us. And I think getting back to nature is ultimately the answer. And it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like, oh, that can't be true, that I just take nature walks or go out to the woods and I'm going to feel better. But it really is. It's built into our DNA. And that is where we find our health, is through nature and our connection to it.
Well, our mitochondria are the sensors, and they're sensorial, and when they are in health, I animate them where I'm like their avatar, and they're in these little spaceships inside of the cosmos that is my inner biofield, and they're driving around these little spaceships, and they're getting feedback from me, the avatar, who's interfacing with the environment, and they're having this sensorial experience. And they're not just ATP energy producers, although that's what they do, but they're having this really amazing sensorial experience. And yes, your skin is smelling, it's feeling, it's tasting, it's hearing, and that bidirectional exchange is happening. And those little, space cars in your inner cosmos are driving around, getting so much feedback from you, the avatar, interfacing with the program that is reality.
Very cool. Very cool. I like that perspective. Yeah, and I assume that melanin has a very important role to play in all of this as well, because melanin is found in so many areas of our body, not just in our skin. And then how that actually is able to absorb that information and feed that information to our mitochondria so it can know what to do. So I guess this is why melanin is super important, that we're able to, be outside under the full spectrum light, because we are building our melanin in our skin, but then through the cold, by embracing the seasons, we're also able to build our internal melanin stores as well. So our communication system inside the body, continues to operate optimally as it should, due to the seasonal changes. So yeah, I love that.
I'm doing a lot of research, and it's for another conversation to dive deep in, that copper and melanin are melanin copper. It's one and of the same, and I'm starting to understand that they're synonyms. And it's funny that you say that, Andreas, because in terms of like the two key minerals that are your keys to your oxygen metabolism, iron is inert and copper is intelligent. And so when we look at it that way, the copper, the melanin, the intelligence that is linking you to this sensorial experience that is vitality and being alive, it is really interesting to put that together. And of course, this is a work in progress where I'm weaving these threads, but melanin and copper are, I have a feeling, more synonymous than we've researched up to this point.
Very cool. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've heard a lot about copper as well, and it's super fascinating, but I've never heard the relationship of melanin and copper together. I heard you talk about it with young King Mito on one of your previous episodes, and I thought that was super fascinating. And yeah, I'm looking forward to, educating myself more on that, and listening to you guys, discussing about it on this awesome roundtable that you have created.
Well, thank you. I think this is probably a good place to kind of wrap it up. But yeah, the whole idea of this roundtable is to bring, different areas of expertise together and kind of weaving this tapestry, in Lauren's words, of, what how it's all connected. Everything within the system is all connected. And so you can't separate the minerals from the pigments, from the non-visual photoreceptors, from, to the neurotransmitters and the hormones. Our body is the ultimate quantum supercomputer, and it all has to be functioning or operating in coherence. And it really starts at the mitochondrial level. We take these mitochondria, these little spaceships floating around in our body. I really do love that explanation, because I think it really puts it into a really good perspective. But we have to care for these little cellular vehicles that are providing our body with everything it needs to function, and that includes its relationship with the outside world. So I think these conversations are just going to get deeper and more fascinating, and I'm so looking forward to maybe having you on again at some point, and we can dive deeper into all of this.
Absolutely. And there is, so much that we haven't, discussed about so many other aspects of life and that, have an impact on our overall health and well-being. And for sure, it's not only about one thing. And I really loved it how you guys highlighted that, it's not only about the light, and it's so much about everything, together. And everything is important and how everything interplays. But if we use the circadian mechanism as our base, as our guideline, then we can build everything else upon that, and that can have an amplified effect so that we can all live more harmoniously and coherent with our environment and also with our people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point with our people, because we cannot be separated from the rest, right? What I do to myself impacts the people around me and has this huge ripple effect. And if we want to make changes on a massive scale and change what's happening around the world, we have to start with ourselves.
So beautifully said. I always say that healing is yes and. It's yes and yes and yes and I look forward to when this roundtable starts to flesh out and we've got 6 or 7 or 8 people discussing and weaving the tapestry at the same time, and yes anding and putting all of the pieces together so that we can see the greater connectivity between ourselves and all aspects of wellness, and then, like you said so beautifully, the people in our environment and the people around us. So it's going to be amazing to watch the tapestry grow. And thank you so much, Andreas, for coming and discussing with us and bringing your expertise and bringing all of your ands in your basket of ands to add to the collection of ands that we're building here.
Well, thank you both of you for having me on, and it was such a pleasure talking to you both. And I loved it because both of you had like so much more to input into the conversation, into elaborating and expanding more into areas that potentially I am more unaware of. So I think this is such a beautiful way for us to all keep on learning, growing, and expanding. And we can just leave this conversation with some questions and, become, keep on improving ourselves and be the change that we wish to see in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you again so much, and we will definitely talk again very soon. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you,
And
guys.
thank you,
Thank you. Have a
Andreas.
beautiful
You
evening.
too.
Yeah, you as well, Andreas. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.